They didn't forget my name, they just chose not to say it. At my parents' wedding, there was no seat for me at the front, no mention of me in their vows, no glance when I walked in alone. And when I reached up to fix a flower arrangement just to help out of habit, my sister turned to the guests and said, "She'll ruin it." Like I was a stain on the frame. No one spoke. Not my mother, not my father. When someone asked who I was, Rachel smiled and said I was just a distant cousin. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply left. 2 days later, I posted one photo from Côte d'Azur in a red silk dress. No caption. No names. Just proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk out of the picture they tried to erase you from and never step back in. I landed in Portland on a Friday afternoon, the sky just as overcast as I remembered it from childhood. The air smelled like wet bark and old pavement, and somehow that scent still made me feel like an outsider. I hadn't been home in almost 5 years. Not because I was angry, just because nothing ever really waited for me here. The Uber dropped me off in front of the church on Hawthorne Avenue. White roses lined the entryway. There was a small wooden sign out front in cursive gold that read, "Celebrating 30 years of love, Robert and Meredith Sanders." My parents. Still married, still meticulous. Still obsessed with curating perfection no matter how unnatural it felt to live inside. I pulled my coat tighter and walked inside. Everything was polished. The aisle had been dusted with ivory petals. Guests in beige and navy filled the pews. Soft piano music floated through the air like some prelude to a family I didn't belong to anymore. Photographers moved through the crowd like stage crew. One of them paused near me and smiled. "Are you part of the vendor team?" I stared at him for a second before shaking my head. I'm family." "Oh. Sorry, ma'am." He walked off without asking anything more. I wasn't surprised. I walked up the center aisle scanning the name cards along the pews. Beautiful little tent-folded cards with floral borders and calligraphy. There was one for Uncle Dean and Aunt Sharon. One for Rachel's fiancé's parents. One for Marissa, a childhood friend Rachel hadn't spoken to in years. There were even 2 labeled reserved for media team. But not one with my name. I stood there a little longer than I should have. Then someone tapped my elbow. "Hi, sorry. We're trying to keep the aisle clear for photography." I turned. A young woman in a headset and low bun gave me a tight smile. She looked at her clipboard. "Are you with the groom's side or the bride's?" "Bride's." "Great. You can head toward the back pews. We're a bit tight on space up front." I nodded. Not worth explaining I was the bride's sister. Not worth hearing the pause that would come after that sentence. I walked to the last pew on the left, sat down and tucked my purse beside me. For the next 20 minutes, I watched everyone else arrive. My cousins floated in wearing pale yellow dresses, matching like they were cut from the same roll of fabric. My mother waved people in with practiced grace, cheeks lifted in a smile I hadn't seen since I was 15. She looked beautiful, like the kind of woman magazines used to beg to feature in their real wedding sections. She didn't look my way. I took my phone out of my coat pocket, checked it like a reflex. No missed calls, no texts. Not from Mom. Not from Rachel. Not even from Grace, who had tried to convince me not to come. "I just didn't want you to get hurt again," she had said. Rachel made her entrance exactly 10 minutes late, the kind of delay meant to build attention. She walked in with my father at her side, her off-white silk gown catching the soft lighting perfectly. A professional photographer trailed behind them, snapping as they turned the corner into the chapel. Rachel had always been good at this, walking into a room like it owed her an audience. My father beamed. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a lavender handkerchief. A few people near me whispered, admiring Rachel's dress, her poise, her skin. I didn't hear anyone ask if she had siblings. Her eyes passed over me. If she saw me, she didn't flinch. Or maybe she saw me and decided it didn't matter. The officiant cleared his throat at the altar, welcoming everyone. Guests stood. People clapped politely. The music picked up something orchestral and vague. I stayed seated. No one noticed. Behind me, someone leaned over. "Do you know the family?" I gave a small nod. "I used to." He chuckled like I had made a joke. Turned back to face the front. I didn't. My memories of this church weren't terrible. But they weren't warm either. I had been baptized here. Confirmed here. Stood quietly in the background of Rachel's high school graduation photos here. It was always the same pattern. Rachel in the center. Me off to the side. Every single family photo we took, I was either half-shadowed or slightly blurred. I remember once asking my mom why I wasn't in the framed hallway portrait. She said they had run out of space in the collage frame. I was 18. The music paused. People sat. My parents walked up to speak, taking turns thanking guests. My mother shared a story about their first dance. My father made a joke about her driving skills. The crowd laughed. Laughed like they'd all grown up in our house, like they knew the story. They didn't know half of it. When the microphone was passed to Rachel to speak about our parents, she smiled sweetly. Her voice had that upward lilt it always got when she was in control of the room. I just want to say how grateful I am to have been raised by the kind of parents who always showed me what real love looks like. The words landed heavy. I watched my father squeeze her shoulder. My mother's smile never moved. I looked around to see if anyone was watching me. They weren't. I leaned back and folded my hands in my lap. A woman across the aisle snapped a photo of Rachel and whispered to her daughter, "This family is picture perfect." I closed my eyes. Just for a moment. Somewhere in the music and the monologues and the artificial grace, I felt a wall click into place inside me. Quietly. Finally. Without pain, without tears, just clarity. I didn't belong here. I didn't ruin anything. But I wasn't part of it either. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a fact. Something I didn't need to fix. Something I could finally leave behind. I stood up slowly, more out of habit than purpose. The ceremony had shifted into something soft and meandering, a slideshow playing with piano music beneath it. I watched Rachel's childhood photos float across the screen above the altar like curated memories. Her as a baby, as a ballerina, as homecoming queen, as the golden daughter. Each picture carefully chosen. None with me in them. Not even one. A vase near the front had tilted slightly, one of the floral arrangements starting to lean. No one else seemed to notice. The stems pressed against the edge of the podium, slowly sinking sideways under their own weight. I stepped forward, instinct taking over. I didn't think. I just did what I always did. Fix the thing no one else wants to deal with. I reached the front and adjusted the vase, nudging it back into position, then gently straightened the cluster of lilies and white garden roses. It took 5 seconds. But 5 seconds was enough. Rachel's voice cut through the music like a blade. "She'll ruin it." It wasn't loud. It was sharp. The room shifted all at once. The chatter stopped. The music faded like someone had yanked the volume knob. Every head turned. I was still holding a stem of eucalyptus when it happened. I looked up. Rachel was standing with one arm looped through our father's, the other still clutching her speech notes. Her face was composed, but her voice had echoed. That perfect veil of hers moved slightly with the air, her eyes fixed on me like I had just walked into a spotlight I hadn't asked for. My hand dropped to my side. No one spoke. Not my father, who gave me a quick, confused frown but didn't say a word. Not my mother, who looked away as if studying the ceiling beams. Not the officiant, not the family friends, not even the wedding planner. It was like the entire room had received the same signal freeze. I stepped back from the vase, one small shuffle. My heels barely made a sound against the polished wood floor. A woman in the second row leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind her hand. I turned, made my way back down the aisle. I could feel eyes trailing after me, sticking to my coat like static. I kept my chin level. Not proud, not ashamed. Just still. I had nearly reached the end of the pews when someone tapped my arm. A middle-aged man in a tan blazer, someone I didn't recognize. "Excuse me, are you?" The sister. I opened my mouth to answer. Before I could say anything, Rachel called out from the front with that bright social voice she used at networking events. "No, she's just a distant cousin." Laughter rippled from a few people. Polite, shallow, like they didn't quite understand the joke but wanted to belong to the moment. I didn't stop walking. I passed the last row, pushed open the side door, and stepped out into the hallway. The music resumed inside. Applause followed. A joke had landed somewhere in there apparently. The room moved on. I walked into the coat room and leaned against the wooden wall. For a moment I didn't feel anything. Then a dull ache settled in my chest. Not pain, not yet. Just something tired. Something old. I pulled out my phone again. Still nothing. I stared at the screen for a long time, then tapped Grace's name. It rang twice before she picked up. Elise, are you okay? I could hear city noise behind her. The sound of traffic, someone laughing in the distance. I pressed my lips together. My voice came out low. She told the entire room I'd ruin it. And then called me a distant cousin. There was a pause. You're joking. I wish I were. What did your parents say? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Grace exhaled hard on the other end. I pictured her on her back porch in Queens pacing with her socks half off, anger twisting her shoulders. You want me to book you a flight? I glanced down at my small roller bag still tucked beside the pew I'd left. Number. I'm leaving now. I'll figure it out. You sure? Yeah. Elise, you don't deserve that. Not from anyone. Not after I know. I ended the call before the warmth in her voice could undo me. I walked back into the main vestibule and found the table with coats and gift cards. Mine was still hanging untouched. I slipped it on. The staff barely noticed me passing by. A woman smiled and said, "Thanks for coming." I nodded. Outside, the air was cooler than before. Somewhere down the street, I heard church bells from another wedding. It made me feel oddly calm, like the world was still going about its business regardless of what had happened inside that chapel. I didn't cry. I just walked toward the corner, hailed a rideshare, and slid into the back seat. The driver asked if I was heading to the reception venue printed on the program. I looked down at it resting in my lap, then shook my head. Number. Take me to the airport. He nodded and adjusted the GPS. I leaned my head against the window, watching the Oregon pine trees blur past. In that moment, something settled. A truth I hadn't wanted to admit before. It wasn't the insult that hurt the most. It was the silence that followed, the collective decision to let it happen. And the worst part, I realized I wasn't even shocked. The plane didn't board for another hour, so I took my time walking the downtown blocks near the airport shuttle drop. Portland still had that damp sweetness in the air, like moss and concrete. Nothing had changed. Same storefronts, same slow pace, same cold that seeps through your coat and into your ribs. I walked past Powell's Books, past the food cart park where Rachel and I used to share teriyaki bowls after school. I kept walking until the sidewalks thinned and the buildings got quieter. I passed a mural someone had painted over what used to be a landscape, was now a faded outline of someone's name tagged in neon pink. The paint peeled at the edges like the whole city had just stopped caring. I sat down on a bench facing an empty lot. Took out my phone and dialed Grace. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, still at the airport? Not yet. Just walking. You okay? Yeah. She didn't fill the silence. She knew me too well for that. I stared across the street. A bakery was closing up for the night. The owner flipped the sign to closed and turned off the lights inside. No ceremony to it. I told her everything. My voice didn't crack. I didn't raise it once. I told her how Rachel called me a distant cousin. How nobody stood up. How my own father didn't say a word. I described the way the room felt afterward, how it swallowed itself whole and spit me out. Grace let out a breath. That's not a family, that's a performance. You were the one thing they couldn't script. I smiled faintly. That was Grace. Always cutting through sentiment like a hot knife through wax. She asked if I was coming back tonight. I said yeah. Flight's in a few hours. Want me to pick you up? No, I'll grab a cab. Thanks though. You sure I'm fine? She paused. Well, if you feel like crashing at my place for a night, I'll make popcorn and we can watch that terrible revenge movie you love. The one with the fake Russian accents. Exactly. Tempting. I could hear her smiling. Love you, Lise. Love you too. I hung up and sat with the silence for a while. I hadn't cried, not once. It wasn't numbness. It was just quiet. Like something had emptied out and left room for clarity. My phone buzzed. A notification from a group text labeled, Sanders Family. Rachel had just dropped a photo from the party. Her and my parents standing together with champagne. The caption read, celebrating 3 decades of real love. So lucky to be part of this legacy. I stared at the picture for a moment. I wasn't in it. Obviously. I opened the group info, scrolled down to leave conversation, and tapped it. A warning popped up asking if I was sure. I was. Then I opened Instagram. Went to Rachel's page. Her latest post had over 500 comments, all full of congratulations and compliments. One woman had written something about sisterhood and how inspiring the Sanders family was. Rachel had replied with 3 pink heart emojis. I unfollowed her. Then our mom. Then our dad. I deleted every old family photo still saved on my phone. It wasn't an act of revenge. I didn't feel angry, just done. Back at the airport, I moved through security like I'd done it 1,000 times. At the gate, I found a quiet corner, pulled out my notebook, and flipped to a blank page. I sat for a while before writing. Not a paragraph, not a list, just one line. This is not where I exist anymore. I closed the notebook, rested it on my lap. Across the aisle, a woman was holding a toddler. He kept trying to climb over her shoulder. She looked exhausted but didn't raise her voice. She just kept catching him gently again and again. There was something about the way she didn't let go that hit me harder than I expected. I remembered one year in middle school, our mom had organized a fundraiser. Rachel had been the lead speaker. I had spent 3 weeks making the slideshow. The night of the event, my name wasn't mentioned once. When I asked our mom why, afterward she said it didn't matter who made what. It was about the team. But Rachel had been the only one pictured on the thank you banner. Then there was the Thanksgiving when Rachel brought her college boyfriend and everyone insisted I sit at the kids' table so he could have a full seat near Dad. Or the time a local magazine did a feature on families who built Portland. They photographed my parents and Rachel in front of my mother's flower shop. I was working in New York by then, but no one told me about the shoot. When I found the article by accident, Rachel said it was just for fun, nothing serious. I closed my eyes and let it all settle. This time, it wasn't about proving a point. It was about knowing I no longer needed to. When they called my boarding group, I stood. No hesitation, no weight in my feet. On the plane, I took a window seat, slipped my notebook into my bag, and leaned back as the lights of Portland faded behind us. Some people search their whole lives for closure. I didn't need to search. It had already happened. Quietly, cleanly, without a single goodbye. Sebastian was waiting for me just past baggage claim, standing tall in his navy wool coat, hands tucked in his pockets like always. His face was calm but steady, like the kind of man who didn't ask questions unless you needed him to. The moment he saw me, he walked forward without a word and pulled me into his arms. I didn't realize how much I needed that until my body sank into his chest. We stood there for a while. He didn't ask how the trip was. He didn't ask about my parents or Rachel or why I was 2 days early coming home. He just held me, his hands warm on my back, his breath steady. He carried my bag without offering, placed it in the trunk of his car, and opened the passenger door for me like he always did. The drive into Manhattan was quiet. The kind of quiet I trusted. I rested my head against the window as the bridges and buildings blurred past. We stopped at the Thai place on 76th. He ordered my usual without needing to check. Back home, we ate on the floor like we always did when neither of us felt like talking at the table. I was still in my airport clothes. He had kicked off his shoes and rolled his sleeves up. Halfway through dinner, he set his chopsticks down and leaned back against the couch. I need your opinion on something. I looked at him. He rarely brought work to the surface like this, unless he was already leaning toward a decision. There's a brand out of San Diego. Luvet. Skincare, vegan, cruelty-free, decent margins, great branding. They're scaling fast. I've been thinking about taking a position. I blinked. The name landed in my stomach like a pebble in a still pond. Just one ripple. I didn't flinch. Sebastian didn't notice. Their founder's doing a press tour next month. She's young, got a good presence. Too polished maybe, but the numbers look solid. I'm meeting her and her CFO next week. He said it so plainly, so casually. Rachel had rebranded herself years ago. Dropped her last name from the company site. Started calling herself RS instead of Rachel Sanders. Built the brand around a curated idea of clean beauty, emotional wellness, and sisterhood. She had even written a book. My face didn't move. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. You know them. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip. I've heard of them. He nodded. Smart. They've grown fast. Honestly, they remind me of early Glossier but with better supply chain management. I set my glass down. Just be careful. He studied me waiting for more. That's it, I shrugged. Some things look better on paper than they are in person. He tilted his head slightly but didn't push. I'll do my due diligence. I'm not in love with their margins yet anyway. I forced a small smile. You always do. We went back to eating. He told me about a founder he'd passed on last month who had crashed spectacularly after lying to investors about product sourcing. I listened, nodding in the right places. My mind drifted. I remembered Rachel's smug little smile when she told me Louvet was going to be her legacy. That she was going to be the next Emily Weiss, but with better taste. I remembered the way she used to tell people I was in finance like it was some boring footnote. Sebastian got up to clear the dishes. I helped without offering. Later that night, after we'd brushed our teeth and changed into old t-shirts, we crawled into bed. He curled around me, one hand on my hip. I stared at the ceiling. Are you glad to be home? He murmured into my shoulder. I nodded. Did they treat you all right? My mouth felt dry. It went about how I expected. He kissed the back of my neck. I'm sorry. I know. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I didn't tell him about the distant cousin comment or the way every person in that church had chosen not to say a word. He didn't need to know. Not yet. Some stories only have power if you keep telling them. I wasn't going to give that moment in Portland any more room than it already took. By the time Sebastian fell asleep, his breathing deep and slow against my back, I had made a quiet decision. I wouldn't interfere. I wouldn't warn him. I wouldn't rescue her. If he was smart enough and he'd see it, and if he didn't, he'd learn. I turned off the bedside lamp and let the dark settle around me. Not everything needed to be fixed. Some things just needed to fall. Sebastian proposed on a Thursday morning in the kitchen, with no music, no build-up, and no audience. He made coffee like he always did, barefoot, still half asleep, hair pushed back with one hand while the other poured almond milk into my mug. I was leaning against the counter in his old MIT sweatshirt, scrolling through email when he slid something small and warm into my palm. I looked down. It was a ring. No box. Just the ring. Gold. No stone. Brushed metal. Simple. Clean. Like him. I blinked, looked up. Are you serious? He nodded. You don't need to say yes now. I already knew. I didn't say anything at first. Just curled my fingers around it, closed my eyes for a beat, then opened them again. Okay. That's it, yeah. Okay. He smiled slowly, the kind of smile that stretched across his entire face. No performance, no flash, just real. He didn't kneel. I didn't cry. It was exactly right. 3 days later, we were on a plane. I let him plan everything. He chose Côte d'Azur because I once told him I liked how the air there smelled like salt and lemon. We stayed on a private charter, not overly expensive but just secluded enough. It was early spring, the breeze still cold, the beaches still quiet. I packed one suitcase. I didn't tell anyone we were going. No save the dates, no group texts, no Rachel. On our second night, Sebastian was asleep in the cabin, the sun just beginning to set. I stood on the back of the boat wearing a red silk dress I'd bought in Nice that afternoon. My hair tangled from the wind. No makeup. Barefoot. The sky behind me turned orange at the edges. The water shimmered like it had somewhere to be. I asked the captain if he'd take a photo. Just one. He used my phone. He didn't say much, just nodded and pressed the shutter. The picture was perfect. My back turned slightly. Face in profile, nothing posed. Just presence. I posted it that night. No caption, no tags. Let the silence say everything. Within an hour, I got a message from Rachel. Nice dress. I didn't reply. The next morning, my mother texted. You didn't think to invite us. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back. No one invited me first. She didn't respond. Sebastian didn't ask about it. He didn't even know I had posted. We spent the days swimming when the water was warm enough, drinking white wine under thin blankets and sleeping late with the windows open. It was the first time in years I felt unobserved. Like I didn't have to explain or shrink or translate myself into something palatable. We walked along the marina one afternoon and passed a group of tourists taking photos in front of a massive yacht. A woman with platinum blonde hair asked if I wanted her to take one of us. No thanks, I said. We're not collecting proof. Sebastian chuckled. You're going to make a terrifying wife. I raised an eyebrow. In what way? In the best way. We didn't talk about wedding dates. We didn't make announcements. I didn't buy a planner or follow bridal accounts. I didn't want a production. I had grown up inside one. I knew how fake the lights could feel after the camera was off. One night I scrolled through the comments under the photo I had posted. It had over 800 likes. Old colleagues, acquaintances, college classmates I hadn't seen in a decade, all flooding the thread with hearts and questions. Where is this? You look amazing. Is this what soft power looks like? I read them quietly, then turned off the screen. I didn't need to explain. That photo wasn't a statement, it wasn't revenge, it was an exit, not from them. From the version of myself that kept trying to earn a seat at their table. Sebastian poured me another glass of wine and kissed my shoulder. You ever think we're too boring for all this? I smiled. Maybe. But boring looks good on us. We watched the tide roll out in silence. Somewhere far away, I imagined Rachel staring at her phone, reading that text from me over and over, trying to decode it like it was some kind of riddle. No one invited me first. But it wasn't a riddle. It was the answer. Sebastian's calendar filled up the moment we returned to New York. Meetings stacked into color-coded blocks, half his days claimed by due diligence calls, investment briefs, and pitch decks. But between the noise, he carved out time for us, slipping back into our rhythm as if we'd never left. Morning coffee, quiet dinners, hands brushing in the dark. One afternoon I came home early from the office. The air was heavy with rain and the kind of cold that made Manhattan feel older than it was. When I walked in, Sebastian was standing at the kitchen island, laptop open, tie undone. He looked up as I dropped my bag. Hey, you got a minute? Sure. He turned the screen toward me. This is the preliminary financial doc from Louvet. Their CFO just sent it over. Would love your eyes on it. I crossed the room and leaned over beside him, scanning the Excel spreadsheet. It took less than 30 seconds to notice the first red flag. The marketing budget line was absurd. Over 30% of gross revenue listed under branding and audience engagement, but with no subcategories. No channel breakdown. No vendor info. Just 5 clean digits repeated quarter after quarter like someone had copy-pasted confidence. And below that, a vague note labeled community partnerships attached to a 7-figure number with no explanation. I scrolled down further. Ingredient sourcing costs were too low for what they claimed their formulations used. If the products really included organic babassu oil and triple-fermented botanical extracts, someone was either lying or buying from invisible farms. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Sebastian watched me as I scrolled. See anything off? I nodded slowly. Their ratios don't make sense. High marketing spend but no CAC data. Ingredient cost doesn't match claimed purity level. Packaging costs are underreported unless they're bottling this stuff in recycled jam jars. He cracked a small grin. That's what I thought. I wanted to believe their margins were clean, but this feels like they're patching holes with buzzwords. I reached for my coffee mug, still warm. You want a second set of eyes on it? Absolutely. You remember Blackridge Analytics? From the MedTech deal? Yeah. They caught 3 shell vendors in under a week. They don't miss. Sebastian leaned back in his chair thinking. Could you connect me? Already texted you the contact. He tapped his phone. Got it. I closed the file and set the laptop aside. I didn't say Rachel's name. I didn't need to. He was already circling the fire. I just handed him the right flashlight. That evening we stayed in. Rain dripped down the windows like the city was rinsing itself. I curled up on the couch with a throw blanket and a book while Sebastian reviewed other portfolios on his tablet. There was music playing low in the background, some ambient jazz playlist he always defaulted to when thinking. I caught him glancing at his screen more than usual, switching between tabs, pulling up industry news, typing quick notes. I didn't ask. After dinner, while we were loading the dishwasher, he finally spoke. What happens if they're lying? Then they're done. Just like that, just like that. He paused, drying his hands. It could get messy. She's loud. High profile. Public facing. If we pull out, she'll spin it, then let her. You really don't care. I turned to him. Number. Not anymore. He nodded slowly, his eyes still searching mine. And I realized then he was starting to suspect something. Not the full truth. Not the bloodline behind the brand. But enough to understand that I knew more than I'd said. And I wasn't going to say it. Some truths are sharper when they're discovered, not told. Sebastian didn't ask further. He just kissed my forehead and went back to his study. I curled up on the couch again, my hands folded in my lap, the light from the hallway spilling softly across the floor. Years ago, I would have jumped in. I would have warned him. Gathered proof. Tried to protect someone who wouldn't do the same for me. Now I just let the current move. It wasn't detachment, it was choice. If something is built on a lie, all you have to do is stop holding it up. It'll collapse on its own. That night, I fell asleep before Sebastian came to bed, my phone resting face down, a single message blinking on the lock screen. From Rachel. Hope you're not still holding on to that cousin comment. You know how events are. Everyone's watching. I didn't open it. I didn't respond. Some things deserve silence. The first real signal came in the form of a phone call Sebastian didn't answer. We were sitting in the living room, takeout containers spread across the coffee table, some documentary playing quietly in the background. His phone buzzed once, then again. He glanced at the screen, tapped it silent, and set it face down. Rachel. I didn't ask. He didn't explain. Instead, he picked up a spring roll and said, almost offhand, Blackridge submitted the final report this morning. I wiped my hands with a napkin and waited. It's worse than we thought. She overstated annual revenue by nearly 40%. They fabricated customer retention data. Paid influencers were listed as unpaid community partners to inflate brand credibility. And 2 of the vendors don't actually exist. I let out a slow breath. She's built a house of glass. He nodded. And now every investor in the portfolio has a rock. That night, Sebastian worked late in his study. I passed by the door once, saw him hunched over the screen speaking into his headset in the firm, clipped tone I recognized from his deal-closing days. It wasn't personal for him, not yet. But I knew it was starting to become real. The next morning, the first action landed. Sebastian's firm issued a formal withdrawal from Louvet. The investment deal was terminated and a fraud complaint was filed with the SEC. His legal team moved with precision, already building distance from the fallout. A second letter went out to Louvet's board and primary banking institutions. That same afternoon, Louvet's accounts were frozen. By dinner time, Rachel had lost access to more than just her funding. She had lost her control. My phone buzzed at 7:16 p.m. Rachel, what did you do? I stared at the message. Then turned my phone face down. 10 minutes later, another text came in. Rachel, you think this fixes anything? You've always been jealous. I didn't respond. Sebastian came into the kitchen holding 2 glasses of wine. She's going to spin this. Fast. Let her. You sure you don't want me to handle it more quietly? Number, let it happen the way it's supposed to. We clinked glasses without ceremony and took our first sips. The next morning, my mother reached out. Meredith, what's going on with Rachel's company? I didn't answer. A few hours later, a second message. Meredith. Is this you? I typed my reply carefully. Number. But I'm not standing in the way either. This time there was no response. By the end of the day, the story had started leaking. A mid-size finance blog published a speculative post about a major skincare brand facing legal scrutiny. It didn't name names, but the language was familiar to anyone in the industry. Words like misrepresentation and undisclosed liabilities were enough to light the match. Within 24 hours, Business Insider picked it up. Then Bloomberg. Then BuzzFeed. The headlines varied, the clean beauty scandal nobody saw coming. From skincare star to SEC spotlight. Louvette facing allegations of financial fraud. Rachel's face was everywhere. Photos of her on red carpets giving TEDx talks holding branded serums next to minimalist shelves. Her perfectly staged world now framed with headlines questioning its foundation. I sat on the couch with a blanket and a fresh cup of tea watching it all unfold without turning the volume up. Sebastian stood behind the couch, arms crossed. This will get louder. Let it. She's going to make it about you eventually. She can try. He came around, sat next to me, took my hand. You okay? I'm exactly where I thought I'd be. He studied me a moment longer, then nodded. The news cycle did what it always does. Analysis, speculation, social media takes. Think pieces from brand strategists. Interviews with influencers quietly distancing themselves. Comments sections split between outrage and defense. Rachel didn't post for 2 days. Then she issued a statement. It was long, full of corporate phrasing and vague accountability. She blamed administrative oversights, the pressure of scale, the weight of expectations placed on female founders. She did not mention her investors. She did not mention me. But she didn't have to. That night, I received another message. Rachel, you're enjoying this, aren't you? I didn't reply. She followed with a voice note I didn't open. Instead, I went into the kitchen, reheated my tea, and stood by the window. Outside, the city glowed like always. Cabs and sirens, people laughing on balconies. A couple arguing on the sidewalk below. Life continuing. Unbothered by the unraveling of a brand name. Somewhere inside, I felt something subtle. Not satisfaction. Not vengeance. Just the quiet certainty that I hadn't caused this. I had simply stopped holding it up. And gravity had done the rest. Under the soft hum of the heater, I sat in my studio, brush in one hand, ceramic palette in the other. The clay had hardened just enough for first glazing. I moved slow, intentional, each stroke a decision. My phone was face down beside me, but the vibration cut through the silence like a knock at a door. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. I set the brush down, wiped my fingers on a linen rag, and flipped the phone over. 3 notifications. All the same link. The Lie Beneath the Skin by Olivia Hale. I blinked. For a moment, my heart tightened. I didn't open the article immediately, just stared at the title. The irony wasn't lost on me. Olivia Sebastian's sister. Quiet, sharp, usually too busy investigating politics or nonprofit fraud to care about clean beauty influencers. But this time, apparently, she had cared enough. When I finally tapped in, the header image loaded first. A black and white photo of Rachel standing under soft lights at a Louvette launch party, half her face turned toward the camera, smiling like she had nothing to hide. The caption underneath was surgical. A face for the movement. A mask for the truth. The article was long. Over 5,000 words. Painfully thorough. She'd gone back through trademark filings, investor briefings, and influencer agreements. She interviewed former staffers, brand collaborators, even a biochemist who tested the ingredients of Louvette's flagship serum against the company's claims. It wasn't just about fraud anymore, it was about betrayal, greenwashing, exploitation, emotional manipulation of customers seeking ethical choices, a performance of female empowerment hiding corporate greed. I read the whole thing without pause. By the time I reached the end, the silence in the room felt heavier than before. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gleeful either. I was still. The article had no mention of me. Olivia hadn't reached out for a quote. I hadn't known she was writing it. There were no breadcrumbs leading readers to the familial thread beneath the surface. It was cleaner that way. It also told me one thing with complete clarity. Sebastian hadn't interfered. Olivia had done the work on her own, and for her it wasn't personal. It was just the truth. I took a screenshot of the headline and cover photo. I didn't post it. I didn't send it to anyone. I saved it in a folder on my phone labeled Quiet Proof. Some stories don't need to be retold. They just need to exist. Later that evening, I watched the ripple effect unfold in real time. The article went live at noon. By 3 p.m., it was trending on Medium and reposted by 3 major beauty watchdog accounts on Instagram. By 5 p.m., Twitter had picked it up. By 8 p.m., Rachel locked her account. The next day, her publicist issued a haphazard statement denouncing the article as one-sided, politically motivated, and defamatory. Olivia responded by posting a link to the source documents followed by one line. "My inbox is open to anyone who feels misrepresented." That was all it took. The comment sections exploded. Former interns came forward. A chemist posted a photo of a Luvette lab report labeled confidential. A YouTube skincare reviewer uploaded a 15-minute video breaking down ingredient inconsistencies using Luvette as a case study in marketing deception. None of it was my doing. But every part of it felt like an echo of what had once happened to me. The silence after the slap, the eyes pretending not to see the subtle turning away. Only this time it wasn't me on the floor of the cathedral. It was her. Sebastian came home late that night. I was still at the studio wiping down tools. "You saw the article?" he asked as he stepped inside. I nodded. That was Olivia's decision. I didn't put her up to it. "I know. You okay?" "Yes." He watched me a moment longer, then set a takeout container down on the bench beside me. "Shrimp dumplings." I smiled. Later while eating he asked quietly, "Did you expect it to feel better?" I shook my head. I didn't need it to feel good. I just needed it to be true. And now I can stop waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. That night, Rachel sent me one message. "Enjoy it while it lasts." I didn't reply because it wasn't about enjoyment. It was about quiet alignment. Like the moment a painting finally dries, or the clay hardens in exactly the shape you meant for it. Not dramatic, not loud. Just finished. The world would keep talking. And I would keep working. She went live on a Tuesday. I wasn't watching, but the alerts came in anyway. Texts from former coworkers, college acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, even Grace, with a simple message. "She's unraveling." I waited until the live stream ended before opening the clip. Rachel sat in a bright cream room, soft filters glowing over her skin. No makeup, no lashes, hair pulled into a loose, deliberate bun. Her voice wavered as she told her version of the story. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. Sometimes it's the pauses between words that point hardest. Her claims were vague. She had been sabotaged. A trusted family member had turned others against her. She didn't know who to trust anymore. She just wanted to do good. Help women feel beautiful. Her voice broke when she said that. For a moment I wondered if it was real. Then the comments caught up. One after another they poured in, not just questioning her version but tearing it apart in real time. "Where are the lab results then? So all your ex-employees are lying. Your family didn't fake your financials." The most liked comment was from Claire Donovan, a journalist out of Chicago known for following corruption cases in tech startups. She'd stitched a short rebuttal video within minutes of the stream ending. "Let's be clear," she said, eyes cold behind wireframe glasses. "What we're seeing is not a woman victimized by betrayal. What we're seeing is the final act of someone watching the mirror crack and still hoping the audience only sees the reflection." She followed it with a direct link to the SEC filings that now included a formal freeze on Louvet's assets. And that's when it became irreversible. Rachel didn't post again that week. But the noise kept growing louder without her. 2 days later, an anonymous source leaked that Jason Grant, the CFO of Louvet, had left the state in the middle of the night. His name disappeared from the company's online records. The company's Instagram page was wiped clean. Their offices in Santa Monica locked their doors and the customer service line looped into a dead tone. I didn't smile. I didn't frown either. I deleted the live stream clip from my phone and stood up. The studio light was dim, but I didn't need much. I walked to the large canvas resting against the back wall. It was a frame I'd stretched myself, a wide panel left blank for months. The only thing I'd done so far was mark the corners with the outline of light. I picked up a pencil, not a brush. I didn't draw a figure. No face. No silhouette. I drew the shape of open space. A window with no one in it. A room where no one waited. A horizon where no one blocked the sun. Just light. Back when I was younger, I always tried to paint people. Their expressions, their angles, their presence. I wanted to capture them, maybe because I thought that would make them stay. Now I understood better. The absence of someone can be more powerful than their presence. And the silence, when chosen, can speak with terrifying precision. Grace called that night. "Did you see it?" I said yes. "Are you okay? I'm not involved." "But it's still personal." "Not anymore." She paused. "It's wild, Elise. I remember when you would have jumped in to fix everything. I remember too." "What changed?" I put the brush down. Looked out the window. The New York skyline was dark in places, alive in others. I realized no one ever jumped in to fix me. She didn't speak again after that, but I knew she understood. The world didn't need me to clarify the truth. It had found its own way there, and all I had to do was not stand in the way. That more than anything else felt like peace. I stayed up that night working. Not on the blank canvas, but on something older. A piece I'd shelved years ago because it reminded me too much of how invisible I felt. Now, though, I saw it differently. It wasn't a sad painting. It was an honest one. I added only one thing. A shadow. Faint, off-center. Almost fading. Then I signed it. For the first time in years, I signed my name without hesitation. Not out of pride, out of clarity. Elise Ward. That's all. No title. No caption. No tag. Some stories do not end with applause. They end with the room quiet. The light shifting. And a woman alone, but not lonely, choosing to step outside the frame. This time with no one watching. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Meredith showed up on a Thursday morning without calling first. I saw her through the peephole, standing stiff in a beige trench coat, like she had been waiting outside longer than she would ever admit. I almost didn't open the door. Not out of malice, just instinct. Old muscle memory told me to stay quiet, stay still, stay away. But I unlocked it. She didn't smile when I stepped back to let her in. She looked smaller than I remembered. Like she'd folded in on herself since I'd last seen her, standing tall in the church aisle, looking past me like I was a stranger in borrowed heels. She sat down on the edge of my couch, back straight, knees tight together, as if she were in someone else's living room. I didn't offer tea. I didn't ask why she was here. She started speaking like a dam had broken. She said Rachel wasn't eating. That she hadn't left her condo in days. That the investors were gone, the press wouldn't stop calling, and now the family name was smeared everywhere. She said it like I had written the headlines myself. She cried when she said Rachel needed help. I watched her. This woman who raised me, who told me I was smart but too quiet, who praised Rachel's spark and asked me not to outshine it, who once turned off the television during my art school interview and said, "Let your sister have her moment." Her hands shook. Her voice cracked. But her eyes didn't meet mine. She wasn't here for me. She was here for the role I used to play. The fixer. The silent one. The daughter who disappeared into the background and cleaned up messes without being asked. I waited until she finished. Then I said calmly, quietly, with no heat behind the words, only wait. "You didn't come here to see me." She blinked. "What?" "You came to find the daughter you thought would stay silent forever." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You didn't knock because you missed me. You knocked because you're afraid Rachel won't come back from this, and you assumed I'd know how to make it all go away. That's not true, isn't it?" She looked down at her lap, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. I waited again. I had learned that silence makes people show themselves more clearly than questions ever could. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't know you were this angry." "I'm not angry," I said, and I wasn't. "I'm just done pretending." She started crying again. Real tears this time. I believed them. I didn't resent them. But they didn't change anything. Meredith reached for my hand across the coffee table. I let her touch it. Just for a second. Then, I pulled gently away. "You don't owe Rachel anything," she said, her voice almost breaking. "But she's still your sister." "No," I said, "she used to be. And I used to be your daughter. But none of you ever looked for me when I vanished. You only noticed when your favorite started falling. That's not fair." I nodded slowly. "Maybe not." She stood. Her knees wobbled a little, like she wasn't sure what direction to take next. I opened the door for her. She hesitated in the doorway. "Are you really not going to do anything I already did?" I said. I stepped out of the frame. Meredith walked into the hallway and didn't turn around. I closed the door behind her. This time, it didn't feel like closing someone out. It felt like opening something inward. The studio was quiet. My paintings lined the wall like soft witnesses. I sat down and looked at one piece in particular. It was the one I had signed days earlier. The one with no faces, no central figure, just a wash of layered light moving across the canvas like the slow exhale of someone no longer waiting to be seen. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't proving anything. I was just living. There was no more proving, no more chasing, no more stitching up the wounds that others left untended. That was the last time I saw my mother in person. She didn't write, didn't call. Neither did Rachel. And I didn't wait. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and returned to work. Not to escape, not to numb, but because it was what I wanted. The frame no longer held me. The silence wasn't a punishment, it was a choice. I had finally stepped into my own story. And I had no plans of stepping back out. Under soft studio light, Olivia adjusted her recorder and gave me a small, unassuming smile. She didn't wear makeup. No polished nails, no tight curls like Rachel. Just a spiral notebook, a voice recorder, and the kind of calm energy that made you want to tell the truth. She was the one who had written the article. The lie beneath the skin. She never said Rachel's name directly, but the facts spoke louder than names ever could. It was clear she knew exactly where every string in the operation had been pulled from. And now, weeks later, she wanted to hear from me. She asked gently, why now? I paused, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted the words to land cleanly. Because I'm not hiding anymore. She nodded, didn't interrupt, just let the space hold. I used to think I was waiting for someone to hand me a seat. At the family table. At the boardroom. At the wedding. I thought if I was quiet enough, patient enough, someone would notice the empty chair and invite me in. Did they number? And that was the point. I was never supposed to be invited. I was just supposed to wait quietly and make everyone else look good while doing it. So what changed? I built my own table. She stopped writing for a moment. I saw it in her eyes, the shift. The weight of the sentence settling in. That line didn't feel heavy when I said it. It felt simple. Honest. I didn't plan it. But when she published it the next day, it became something else entirely. I built my own table. People reposted it, quoted it. Plastered it across photos of women standing alone in boardrooms, artists beside blank canvases, mothers with tired eyes and full hearts. It became a whisper for those who had never been handed a seat. Meanwhile, news broke that Rachel had been subpoenaed. The Securities and Exchange Commission had formally launched an investigation into Louvet. Their marketing claims, their financial reporting, their investor pitches. The whole glossy shell cracked wide open. Jason Grant was missing. Rumor was he'd fled to Mexico. Rachel claimed she had no knowledge of the irregularities, but the paper trail said otherwise. Her bank accounts were frozen, her name wiped from major brand partnerships. Former influencers who had once begged to promote her serum now publicly distanced themselves. The perfect girl with the perfect company was collapsing, and no one offered her a hand. Not because they were cruel. Because they had seen the way she treated the ones who once stood beside her. When the interview dropped, my inbox filled with strangers writing, "Thank you." Some told me about sisters who stole credit, mothers who loved them less, careers where they had always been the one taking the notes but never speaking. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was circling the room waiting to be called in. I wasn't a backup singer. I wasn't an extra in someone else's big day. I had my own table, my own studio, my own silence. When Meredith texted to say Rachel had called her crying, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because that version of me, the one who used to rush in with solutions and soft words, was gone. Sebastian came home that night with a bottle of wine and 2 tickets to a weekend retreat upstate. He handed me the envelope and kissed the top of my head. Thought you could use a reset. I smiled. No wedding dresses. No headlines, just trees and sky and space to be still. We made dinner together, turned off our phones, and talked about everything except Rachel, and I didn't once feel guilty for that. "Elise, you sure you're ready to be seen like this?" Olivia had asked before she left. "I'm not being seen. I'm just not invisible anymore." Later that week, I walked into a small gallery on the Lower East Side. The owner had agreed to show my work as part of a Women in Art series. The title of my collection sat printed on the wall near the entrance. No seats reserved. It was bold and quiet at the same time, like me. As people began to trickle in, I stepped back, not to disappear but to watch. To witness. To feel what it was like when someone walked toward something I made and saw themselves in it. No explanations, no tags, just light, texture, color, and space. Space that belonged to me. The red dress still hung in the back of my closet like a secret only I was keeping. I hadn't touched it since we got back from the first trip to Côte d'Azur. Maybe I was waiting for a reason. Or maybe I just wanted to see if the person who wore it that day still existed. When I slipped it on again, it still fit. Slightly looser in the waist maybe, but the silk still moved with me just like it had before. I stepped out onto the deck of the boat, and the wind caught the hem, sent my hair flying over my shoulders. Sebastian looked up from his phone and smiled, no words needed. He handed me a glass of white wine and we clinked without ceremony. There was nothing to toast this time. No victory, no announcement. Just air-ocean time. I walked to the bow again and stood in the same spot I had a year ago. Same boat, same man, same ocean. And then, without asking, he raised the camera. Click. Later that evening, in our small rental above the cliffs, I posted the photo. Same angle, same red silk. Same backdrop of blue and sky. But this time it came with words. Sometimes erasing yourself is the beginning of everything. No hashtags. No tags, no names. Just the caption. I closed the app and left my phone on the nightstand. By morning, I woke up to over 27,000 likes and thousands of messages. Most from strangers. Some from women I hadn't spoken to since college. I read each one slowly like they were pages from someone else's journal. My sister erased me from the wedding party. My dad said I'd never make it on my own. I was the invisible one in every family photo. I watched your story and saw myself in the background. I didn't know anyone else felt it. It wasn't validation I felt reading those messages. It was kinship. Connection. A quiet knowing that I wasn't the only one who had been made small, then smaller, then asked to thank them for the crumbs. Rachel was gone from the public eye. No more weekend skincare tips. No more brunches with artfully staged sprigs of rosemary on white plates. No more charity galas. She had been quietly dismantled, not by vengeance, not by fire, but by exposure and consequence. Her name still appeared in court documents, and sometimes I'd get forwarded an article by someone who didn't know better. But she wasn't a headline anymore. She was a cautionary tale buried beneath stories about IPOs and influencer collapses. I hadn't blocked her. I just stopped looking. And that absence was more powerful than rage ever had been. One morning, Meredith sent me an email. No subject line, just one line of text. "You were always the strong one. I'm sorry I never saw it." I didn't reply. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't need the apology to know who I had become. I wasn't looking for retroactive permission to live freely. I had given that to myself. At sunset, I stood alone on the balcony, the ocean turning lavender beneath a sky streaked in gold. Sebastian was inside laying out fresh fruit and bread. A breeze brushed past, and for a moment I closed my eyes. I used to picture this kind of life and then immediately talk myself out of it. I'd shrink it down, make it less vivid, less deserved. I'd compromise it before it had the chance to disappoint me. But not anymore. Now I let myself want things. Let myself dream. Let myself occupy space. Rachel never said she was sorry. She never had to. Because it had never been about her apology. It had always been about my freedom. Freedom from the need to explain, to justify, to perform. To be small enough to fit in a frame someone else had built, and then acted like I should be grateful for being allowed inside. I didn't need their seat. I had built my own table. And maybe that's the point of everything. To finally stop waiting to be welcomed and start building the life that welcomes you. As the stars rose one by one, I turned off my phone again. Not out of avoidance, but peace. I had said what I needed to say. One photo. One caption. No rage. No fire. Just light. And if you're listening to this now, if you've ever felt like someone erased you from your own story, if you've stood at the edge of a frame wondering why you weren't invited in, maybe this is your sign. You don't need anyone to let you back in. Pick up the pen. Write yourself into your own chapter. Stand in your own light. Tell me below. Who tried to write you out, and how did you find your way back to the truth? Leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Because stories like ours, they're not over. Not even close. They're just finally being told.